I appreciate you stopping by to check out this episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about this Creek Audio Systems CAS4140 integrated amplifier. In 1987, this sold for about $440 or about $1,400 in today's money, today being October 2023, according to the handy-dandy inflation calculator. Creek Audio Systems is an English company, which I did not know until I got this unit. I'd never heard of Creek Audio Systems. I believe they're still around today and make several different audio components and are headquartered in London, England. Now, this particular guy is rated at 35 watts per channel into 8 ohms, both channels driven at about 0.04% THD. I'm going to give a little quick view of the front and then the back, and then we'll take the cover off and you'll see the inside of it, and then we'll see the data that I measured on it, and I'll finally have some comments as to my listening experience with this guy. Here is a little closer view of the CAS4140. We'll start over here on the right with our power button, our 1/4-inch headphone jack here. We do have a balance control here, and we do have a volume control, and the volume control is detented. I don't know if you can hear it, but you can certainly feel it. We have a mute button, we have a mute switch, a mono switch, our tape monitor switch here. This is for our auxiliary or CD input, our tuner input, and where it says disc, it means phono input. And it's a moving magnet phono input. This obviously is a rear view of the CAS4140, and starting here on the right, hopefully you can see them, we have our 2 phono input jacks. Now they call it disc input, but that means it's a input for a phono cartridge. That would be a moving magnet phono cartridge. Our grounding lug for the phono input would be this guy right here. Then we have 3 DIN jacks here, and they have cables plugged into them, but this DIN jack here is for the tuner, this one is for the CD or auxiliary, and this is for the tape monitor circuit. So this is what the other end of the DIN jack looks like, and that allows you to hook up your tape deck to it. This is our heatsink for the output devices. So our left and right speaker outputs are these guys here and here. So there is a very unique feature. If you look here, you'll see these yellow jacks. And what happens is that if you connect the ground lead to the yellow jack rather than to the black jack, when you plug in your headphone jack into the front, it disconnects the speakers. That's a little bit unique the way they do that. And lastly, we have a user replaceable fuse up here. So this is what the Creek Audio Systems CAS4140 looks like with the case removed. It doesn't really have a cover, it just kind of has a top half of it. And we have a toroidal transformer right here for the power supply. I should point out that this package is pretty small. It's maybe 5 inches across by, I think, about 15 inches long and probably about 2 inches tall. We do have a couple filter capacitors here. These guys are 3300 microfarad at 35 volts, and these 2 guys right here are 4700 microfarad at 63 volts, I believe. You can kind of see the way the diodes are connected, the bridge rectifier diodes, and kind of a odd connection scheme they got going on. We have some kind of small output transistors here, and just some driver transistors, and it's got looks like probably an op amp for the Phono Stage. This is where the Phono Stage comes in, and I'd imagine these capacitors here are part of that Phono Stage. So that's kind of just what it looks like on the inside. Here's our standard THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz. With the CAS4140 putting out about 5 watts into 8 ohms. You can see that the THDs are looking pretty good. We'll call it at least 0.007%. The SNRs are right around 62, 63 dB, and that is really caused by this 120 hertz power supply spike right here. Also, if you're curious what the harmonics look like here, we see that the odd harmonics, these guys right here, are lower than the even harmonics. Not typical for solid state amplifiers. Typically you would have the odd harmonics higher than the even, but in this case, at least at 5 watts, the even harmonics are a little bit higher than the odd harmonics, at least the first two. This plot shows the frequency response from 20 Hertz to 21 kilohertz using the tuner input, and the CAS4140 is putting out about 5 watts into 8 ohms. There was not a spec on the frequency response using either the tuner input, of which I'm using here, or the CD aux input. There was one on the phono input, and we'll get to that here in a bit. So it does show a dip in frequency response. It's down only half a dB at maybe 12 kilohertz, but then by 20 kilohertz it's down, what, 1.1, 1.2 dB, and we've got a boost in the low frequencies, which tends to clear up by about 50 hertz or so. Here is the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with the 4160 putting out about 5 watts into 4 ohm loads this time. Our THD at 1 kilohertz would be better than 70 dB, so we are there, and we are still set for about 29 dB of gain. The SNRs have gone down a bit from what they were at 8 ohms, if I remember correctly, and in case you're curious what our harmonics look like, you can see the even harmonics are higher than the odd harmonics. At least the second harmonics are higher than the third harmonics, which is not usually what you would expect in solid state amplifiers, but it is the case right here. Here is the frequency response of the 4140 with it putting out about 5 watts into 4 ohm loads. It looks maybe a little bit worse than it did with 8 ohm loads. I believe we did not have this low frequency boost, I'll call it here, that was this great, and at the high end of the band it seemed to be about the same with the 8 ohm load case. Right now we have the Creek putting out about 24 watts into 8 ohms, and in this case both channels are driven. I've got the volume control set for it's almost 30 dB of gain, we'll call it, and you can see our SNRs are around 64 dB. Now the THD for this particular amplifier, which is from England, is specified in dB rather than the usual percent, and the specification was that at 1 kilohertz it should be at least minus 70 dB. So we're beating the THD requirement for this particular unit. Now the power, the max power, was given as 35 watts into 8 ohms with both channels driven. However, if I slowly increase the power, and let me do that, and this is increasing by 0.1 dBV at a time, so we're at maybe just shy of 25 watts. So we're at 25 watts there. You can see that we're still looking okay. 26 watts, still okay, and right there at about 27 watts it kind of goes to pot. You can see our THD is failing the spec, at least for the left channel. The right channel would be still meeting it, but at least the left channel has started to go bad, and if I increase it up just a little bit more, right there we have the right channel joining it. So this thing puts out, I would say, 26 watts comfortably into 8 ohms. So right there at about 26.2 watts, we're still doing pretty good. So I would say that it's about 9 watts short of the specification limit into 8 ohms. Here's a plot showing the output impedance of the CAS4160, and the specification says it should be greater than 0.03 ohms, and basically we are better than 0.03 ohms, pretty close to it anyway. I'm calling this 0.05 ohms, and that would translate to a damping factor of about 160, which is very high. Now we get into the negative ohm range here, and I guess if certain conditions are met, you could get a negative number. I'm not really sure what the significance of that is here, but I do know that for the most part, the damping factor is pretty good. 160 is one of the best I have measured. Here is a plot showing the crosstalk or channel separation, and in this case the active channel is putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. We do have a specification for this. It's dependent on the frequency, so at 20 hertz it's supposed to be better than 65 dB, and we are meeting that at this one. At 1 kilohertz we should be better than 65 dB, so we're at about 54 dB for the left to right crosstalk, but the right to left crosstalk is 75 dB, so it's meeting it. And then at 20 kilohertz we should be better than 50 dB. We are better than 50 dB for the right to left crosstalk. However, we're only at about 28 dB or so for the left to right crosstalk at 20 kilohertz. Here is the multi-tone response of the CAS4140, and with it putting out about 5 watts into 8 ohms, it's showing a distortion-free range of anywhere from about 10 to maybe 10 and a half, 11 bits. This is a plot of the system noise of the CAS4140. In this case, I am using the tuner input and have terminated those inputs into shorts. And there is a weighting applied. This is the IHF CCIR, noise weighting, I guess I would call it. And with that applied, it should be better than 79 dB down, and it looks like it is. That would be minus 80, so it would be meeting the noise level requirement with this weighting applied. So this plot shows the THD versus frequency for a couple different output power levels, and that's into 8 ohms, and this is using the tuner input. And there is a specification for the case when 250 millivolts is applied, which translates to about 6 watts into 8 ohms. So those are the two thick traces, the purple and the green, depending on the channel. At 1 kilohertz, it should be better than 70 dB for the THD. So that's using the scale over here. And indeed, at 1 kilohertz, we are meeting the requirement. At 20 kilohertz, we should be better than 65 dB. So we should be somewhere less than this line and less than this point here. And we are not. We're at maybe minus 60 dB for the right channel and maybe minus 55 dB for the left channel. So it's failing at 20 kilohertz, and then at 20 hertz it should be better than minus 67 dB, and we're right around minus, we'll call it 49 dB or so. So we're quite a bit off at 20 hertz. So right now we're looking at the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with just the left channel being driven, and the reason for that is into a 4 ohm load it should be able to deliver 50 watt with just one channel driven. So I picked the left channel. Let's see what happens as we increase the amplitude. We're at about 36 watts and we're still less than 0.1% THD, so we're doing pretty good. Let's go up a little bit more. Right there we're at 45 watts. Our distortion is still pretty good, but we do have a lot of crap going on, and our SNR has decreased quite a bit. We can go up a little bit more maybe. You can see the harmonic level has really gone bad, and we're at 50 watts and we're less than 1% THD. The SNR is not great at 44 dB, but it looks like with one channel driven it would meet the requirement, at least for the power output. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz. In this case I'm using the phono input, or as they call it, the disc input. We've got a 5 millivolt signal going in. And one thing to note is the gain is pretty low for a phono stage. Usually you'll be in the mid 30s dB range, and we're at about 27 dB. SNRs are not great, around 45 to 50 dB, but for phono stages that's quite typical from what I've seen. And the THD is not bad at less than 0.02%. I really couldn't find a specification for the THD for this. and we'll see how the frequency response does now. Here we have the frequency response from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz of the disc input, as they call it, which is the phono stage. We do have a specification of plus or minus 1 dB, and indeed we are meeting that requirement. It doesn't look real bad other than right here at about less than, I'll say, 22 hertz. There's some kind of a big bass increase going on, but other than that, it looks pretty good. At worst case, it's a half a dB off, and this is with the RIAA weighting applied. And I am measuring at the tape monitor output, as I did with the THD plot. That was also done from the disc input to the tape monitor output. As you saw from the data, the Creek Audio CAS4140 didn't quite hit its 35 watts per channel into 8 ohm original power output specification. It was more around 25 or 26 watts into 8 ohms, both channels driven. And overall, I thought that it did pretty good with its other specifications. It was off here or there, but overall, for something of this age, I thought it did a pretty good job. As far as listening to the 4140, I hooked it up to my Wilson Watt 3 Puppy 2 loudspeakers, played a variety of music, and was very pleased with the sound. I thought it sounded sweet. Now, I wished it had bass and treble controls, but it does not. I thought it did a really nice job for what it is capable of doing at that power level. So with those speakers, it could drive them fairly loud. Obviously, you're not going to use this to DJ a party with, but for just if you have a nice, efficient set of speakers, or maybe even some bookshelf speakers, and you're using this in a smaller space, I thought it sounded really nice. I didn't think it lacked anything in the high end or the mid-range or the bass. I didn't listen to headphones with this, and I did not listen to the Phono Stage, although the Phono Stage measured fairly decently. Depending on how long the unit had been powered off, you may or may not hear a small turn-on thump. That's quite normal for vintage gear. I didn't hear anything unusual when I turned it off. Also, when it was on and the CD input was terminated into shorts, I did hear the standard little hum hiss. It wasn't really that bad at all. It was actually much less than what I was expecting. But you walk away a few feet and you just don't hear it. And obviously when music is playing, you don't hear it. It's pretty normal amount of hiss and hum out of an integrated amplifier. Besides that, I think if you were to have a chance to own one of these, it's a nice sounding little unit. I'm not a fan of the DIN jacks for the auxiliary and the tape monitor. I'm not sure what they were thinking there. Maybe that's something that's popular in English audio equipment. I don't really know, but maybe back then it was. At least the phono inputs or the disc inputs are RCA style. So once again, I thank you for checking out this video. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, that would be a nice thing to do to help the channel grow. And until next time, have a great day or night.